Conference between India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S Jaishankar and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Both the leaders, of course, stressed on the importance of stability in Afghanistan. Afghanistan and the situation there remained high on the agenda of talks, as well as the follow-up questions after the press conference wrapped up. Another important question was the framework of the Quad grouping as such, and both leaders stressed on the relationship between US and India as being vital and a highly consequential relationship in modern times. Another remark by Jaishankar that is likely to make headlines is when he was asked about the Quad framework and China's response to it. And Jaishankar, of course, said that China needs to get over the idea that others are doing something to target them. Both the leaders discussed the stability situation in Afghanistan and said that for peace to remain in Afghanistan, it is important for all neighbors to be focused on that, and both are important stakeholders in the security situation in Afghanistan, and that was high on the agenda, as we saw from the press conference that just wrapped up between India's External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Secretary Blinken said that for like-minded nations like the Quad, coming to work collectively is very important, and the Quad is a summit where the four countries are aiming to pool their resources, work together on post-pandemic economic recovery, the climate crisis and other serious issues, and maintaining peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific, of course, remains top of the agenda. And Jaishankar also said that in a globalized world today, India has interests far beyond its immediate borders. Security in the Indo-Pacific and peace in the region was high on the agenda between the two foreign ministers. They also discussed the situation unfolding in Afghanistan as the Taliban continues to make territorial gains in the region. And both leaders said that security in Afghanistan is crucial for both the countries, and a lot of emphasis was laid on the relationship between US and India going forward, and both of them said that it is a vital relationship. Now, for more on what the leaders just said, joining us now on WION is our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Siddhant, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us about some of the biggest takeaways as the two leaders have just wrapped up their press conference.
Well, Priyanka, it was almost a 45 minutes long press conference which took place here, and the focus, of course, was everything that both sides can talk. Whether it's Afghanistan, the Indo-Pacific, questions were, of course, asked about the Chinese worry regarding the Quad. Of course, we know that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken clearly said that Quad is not a military alliance. His focus, of course, was also on Afghanistan. When it comes to Afghanistan, important words coming from the Indian External Affairs Minister as well, who clearly said that we do not want Afghanistan to become a center of terrorism, but we also do not want Afghanistan to become a source of refugees. That's a very important issue, because here for the first time India has talked about refugees coming from Afghanistan. That, of course, is a worry that EU also shares, but also the issue of terrorism, a particular issue that has been now raised by many Central countries like Tajikistan, who share border with Afghanistan, and having worried about the recent territorial gains made by Taliban. But nonetheless, this meeting saw, and of course the press conference saw, almost everything which both sides have been talking about publicly being talked about here. In fact, the Quad was something that was specifically mentioned by both sides. We know that later this year, the Quad summit, the first Quad in-person summit, is expected to take place in US, and that summit, of course, could see the Indian Prime Minister going to Washington. This visit, of course, lays ground for that important summit as well. In fact, the vaccine initiative was a key outcome of the virtual summit that took place, and on vaccine initiative as well, there were conversations. In fact, the U.S. Secretary of State lauded India for helping U.S. Amidst the COVID pandemic, and of course highlighted how the U.S. also reached out to India.
Right, let's talk about one comment that is guaranteed to make headlines, definitely, the subject of the Quad Forum and the framework. Now, the US Secretary of State clearly said that it's not a military alliance, and Jaishankar, in fact, said that China should stop thinking that everybody is trying to target them. Tell us what you make of this.
Well, it's an important statement made from Delhi, and interestingly, the Indian External Affairs Minister, while he was answering that question, he also talked about BRICS, talking about how BRICS has been something that is another grouping. So he said it's part of diplomacy to be part of groupings, and India, of course, has been part of diversified groupings, whether it's BRICS, which of course has Chinese presence, whether it's SCO. In fact, today the Indian Defence Minister is in Tajikistan for the SCO Defence Ministers meeting, and that grouping has China as a lead member in terms of the grouping, and now of course Quad. So clearly the message from the Indian side was that you don't have to create unnecessary worries about a certain grouping, and we know the number of criticism coming from Beijing over Quad. In fact, the Chinese Foreign Minister has went ahead to say that Quad is the Asian NATO. This of course was clearly dismissed by the US Secretary of State here in Delhi. A very short visit in terms of a one-day visit with a lot of engagements being packed, but of course a high-profile visit and a lot of outcomes as well. He of course announced on the US support, the next tranche of US support to India as well in terms of the COVID crisis.
Right, Siddhant, thank you so much for all your inputs and thank you for joining us on WION.